Dear viewers, welcome to this video. My name is Ben Summers and I'm the friendly host of Ben's History Videos. Today I thought I'd bring you all a funny story about how one man's prank fooled the entire city and generated a bit of a storm in the local press. For those who don't know Sydney, this story takes place on Sydney Harbour, specifically on the small harbour island fortification named Fort Denison. Prior to being a fortification, it was a small rocky island called Pinchgut. The name came from the hunger suffered by a convict who was put there as an extra level of punishment. Fort Denison was built between 1841 and November 14th, 1857 by contractor William Randall. It is named after Sir Thomas William Denison, Governor of New South Wales from 1855 to 1861. The fort was decommissioned in around the 1930s and has since been used as a space for functions, a nature reserve and a national park. Before I continue, please don't forget to like the video, comment underneath, and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get back to the story. Charles Herbert Lightoller was born in Chorley, Lancashire, Great Britain in 1874. At 10, he went into the care of extended family after his father Frederick left for New Zealand and his mother Sarah Jane died shortly after giving birth to him from scarlet fever, the same illness which claimed his siblings Richard and Caroline. At the age of 13, he went to sea on the sailing ship Primrose Hill as he didn't fancy working in a factory. Over the course of a long career, he worked on a host of different ships, both steam and sail. He also pursued work away from ships. This included a stint as a prospector in Canada during the Klondike Gold Rush and subsequently working as a cowboy in Alberta, Canada. He also rode the rails across Canada before working his passage back to England managing cattle on a cattle ship. By the time he returned home, he was broke. In October 1900, he found himself in Sydney on board the steamer SS Meedic, owned by the White Star Line, on which he served as fourth officer. Interestingly, for its maiden voyage, Meedic had actually inaugurated the company's Australian service and was at the time the largest vessel to ever reach the country. Lightoller had joined this ship in January 1900. The steamer arrived in Sydney after travelling from Portsmouth, London via Cape Town, South Africa. At this time, Australian troops were fighting with the British in the Boer War in South Africa. On landing in Sydney, Lightoller and his fellow officers were amazed and amused at how passionate the feelings for this faraway conflict were among the locals. As with most people, Lightoller had a sense of humour. He and his fellow officers decided to have a bit of fun. A shipmate by the name of Watson suggested setting off one of the guns on Fort Denison. "Wouldn't it be a lark to fire that gun some night? Wouldn't it shake 'em up?" he said. Lightoller was hooked on the idea. By coincidence, their departure from Sydney had been delayed, allowing plenty of preparation time. The incident that followed has become known as the Fort Denison incident. According to one source, Lightoller and some of his fellow shipmates had 6 weeks to devise and plan for their practical joke. They purchased gunpowder in small amounts to avoid suspicion and sourced the fuse. They conducted a reconnaissance mission, rowing out to Fort Denison and inspecting the gun to determine type and whether firing it was even possible. The time came to enact their plan. One night, Lightoller and 4 midshipmen left Cavil's Baths near the Domain. They rowed silently across to Fort Denison, which was a short distance away. 2 of their mates had backed out, perhaps fearing the consequences of involvement, but Lightoller was determined to go ahead. Once there, they tied up their rowboat and ascended the fort's sandstone fortification tower. They hoisted a Boer flag up the fort's lightning conductor rod before starting to pack one of the cannons with white cotton waste and fine grains of powder, together with the 6.4 kilograms of blasting powder they had purchased. The pranksters hoped to fool Sydney-siders into believing the city was under attack from the Boers and that Fort Denison had been captured. A 50-foot or 15-metre length of fuse was ignited, and Lightoller and the 4 midshipmen clambered into their rowboat, only to realise that it was damaged. One of its hull planks had been stoved inwards by hitting the rocks due to the wash that a passing tug had generated. The small boat was half full of water. The fuse was alight. Departure was essential. To keep the boat afloat, Lightoller stripped off his shirt to use as a plug, which he kept in place by pressing his foot onto it. The boat had to be rowed to the nearest point, most likely Mrs. Macquarie's Point. There the men abandoned their boat by escaping through the domain and the government gardens into the city. On the way, Watson had a small mishap when one of his toes became caught in the government gardens fence, sending him into a full somersault, causing him to land on his back. Picture that, if you will. Once on his feet again, and after some nasty thorns had been removed, the men ran on. Arriving at Circular Quay, they were greeted by their fellow crew with enthusiasm and curiosity about whether everything had gone to plan. Shortly after, the fuse ran out and the cannon detonated, shattering some nearby windows and creating an explosion Lightoller described many years after as a crash like thunder. The sudden commotion roused locals who jumped out of their beds and rushed to their windows to find out what was happening. They saw a Boer flag fluttering in the breeze and, not initially knowing it to be a fake, immediately began to panic. By comparison, the jubilant reaction of the pranksters couldn't have been more different, with Lightoller recounting in his autobiography they, in short, behaved like lunatics. To quote him, "We'd done the trick." The whole incident generated much mirth among the crew during the remainder of their stay. However, their movements had not gone unnoticed. The men were spotted by passengers of the Meedic as they rowed to and from the fort. Sailors rostered on the night watch had also seen them. The police were unimpressed and quickly boarded the ship to question the crew. Sydney was a much more conservative city back then, and the residents didn't see the funny side of the crew's prank. A finger-pointing episode broke out between the military and naval authorities as to whom was responsible for the security of Fort Denison. The military tried to pin responsibility onto the naval authorities, who responded by claiming that as Fort Denison was a garrison, it was therefore the responsibility of the military. Initially, the newspapers were unaware of the event. When word escaped and hit the presses, White Star Line was forced to issue an apology to residents as well as pay out damages. The following is an excerpt from the Daily Telegraph, printed shortly after word got out. A strange story. Who fired the gun? The police are engaged in investigating a peculiar occurrence which is reported to have taken place at Fort Denison the other morning. The authorities are strangely reticent about the matter, but from what can be gleaned, it would seem that either a big practical joke has been played by someone, or else there are in our midst persons of a very strong pro-Boer temperament. The police are busily engaged in looking for an explanation. Just as the post office clock had struck the hour of 1 a.m., a gun went off at Fort Denison, breaking some of the windows and, the story goes, putting the red light out. How it happened, nobody seems to know. On the tower are several large guns of an obsolete pattern, and it is one of those that is said to have gone off. Moreover, it has been stated that in the morning, a flag with the Boer colours was found flying on the tower. But whilst this has not been positively denied, an official communicated with last night said he never heard of such a thing. At the same time, he admitted having received a similar report. A man was dispatched to examine the guns, with the result that he reported that one of them had the appearance of having just been fired. A direct question as to whether it had been fired was met with the answer, "That remains to be proved." Meanwhile, the mystery continues and all sorts of stories, possible and impossible, are going about. One is to the effect that a boatman saw a man pull over to Pinchgut and, making his boat fast, climb the tower. It was too dark to see what he was doing, and though he watched him for some time, thinking his movements somewhat mysterious, the boatman took no particular notice of the occurrence until he suddenly heard a gun go off. A fuse is supposed to have been employed, and it is also clear that the gunpowder was carried to the fort. Another newspaper, The Examiner, published this piece about the incident. The police are making inquiries into the hoisting of a Boer flag at Fort Denison during Tuesday night and the firing of an old gun there. It is supposed to be the work of a practical joker. Lightoller's fellow officers and the crew on board the Medic thought his career had ended and his dismissal would be the outcome. In spite of the potential consequences, Lightoller wrote a letter of resignation and confessed soon after. Fortunately, after learning the details of the prank, the company's marine superintendent, Daddy Hewitt, saw the funny side and simply tore up Lightoller's resignation letter and ordered him to get out of here and get back on board your ship. The fact that Lightoller took the fall and blamed no one but himself may also have helped his situation. Lightoller didn't completely avoid punishment. He was overlooked for promotion before the Medic departed, but he was soon leaving Sydney and the controversy far behind. Later, he noted with some amusement that as a result of his shenanigans, he in effect got slight promotion. It was considered unwise to keep him on the Australian service while the controversy remained fresh. As a result, he was transferred to the transatlantic route between Britain and America. He returned to Sydney in 1903 on board the SS Swevik. By this time, all had been forgiven, and the crew thoroughly enjoyed the hospitality offered to them by the Sydney-siders, with Lightoller fondly recalling this visit decades after. During this visit, Lightoller married Sylvania Zillan Hawley Wilson, aka Sylvia, an Australian who was returning home after spending time in Great Britain. The couple married in St James Church, Sydney, and enjoyed a long marriage spanning 49 years. Lightoller eventually became second officer on the Royal Mail steamer Titanic in April 1912. He was the most senior officer to survive this tragedy and would be a crucial witness at the two subsequent inquiries into the disaster held in Great Britain and the United States. He resigned from the White Star Line after the First World War. The sinking of Titanic had robbed him of career prospects at the company, a fate other surviving crew members also suffered. The sea remained in his blood. He and Sylvia later purchased their own private motor yacht named the Sundowner, which they took on many an adventure. In World War II, he participated in the famed 1940 Dunkirk evacuation, bringing many servicemen home to Britain. Charles Lightoller lived an adventurous 78 years. He died in London in 1952 during the Great Smog which blanketed the city. His ashes were scattered at Mortlake Crematorium in Richmond in Surrey. His wife Sylvia died in Britain aged 84 in 1969 at her residence in Twickenham in London's southwest. Medic served for decades under different owners. On September 12, 1942, during the Second World War, the vessel was crossing the Atlantic as part of a convoy of ships when it was hit by two torpedoes launched from the German submarine U-211. The crew abandoned ship, which was struck by a further torpedo, this time from the submarine U-608, which sank it. One crew member lost his life, while the other 85 were saved. Thus ended a 43-year career of a ship that first entered service all the way back in 1899 during Queen Victoria's reign. Thanks for watching this video, which I hope you found interesting and enjoyable. Thank you to all my subscribers. Your support is much appreciated and really helps the channel climb through YouTube's algorithm. Please check out the other videos on this channel as well. This video has been produced with generous assistance from different quarters. Credit must also go to them.